Thanks for joining us today. Whether you know it or not, your student's dream internship for next summer, summer 2026, the application's already open and they have been for a month now. We are not here to make you panic, though. We're here to help you prep for it. We know that you're here because you want to be able to help without nagging and you want your child to be independent, but also make sure to set them up for success when you can. So we titled this Why Resumes Aren't Enough, the real secret for helping students to get internships and jobs. So we're going to have a little conversation. We're going to give you some context, and then we're going to walk through three big areas we want to talk about, give you some information maybe you didn't know, some stories of how this can work for your student, and then some takeaways that you can have at your kitchen table. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. And we should probably start by introducing ourselves.
Let's do that. We're the
My name
ones
is
that
Nick.
didn't know how to go LinkedIn Live. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm Nick Coniglio, and that there is Marnie Stockman. We're actually the authors of a book called The Business of You. Um, so if you're not familiar with us, we have made it our mission to help students get noticed in order to get internships and jobs. And I think we're going to dig into all of that in the next 45 minutes. But as Marnie mentioned in the outset, it's now time. If your student is looking for either an internship, or B, a job, it's shocking to believe, and I learned this myself just 2 years ago with my son, who was a sophomore at the time, when we were thinking, my gosh, he needs a summer internship. And we were looking in early January, February, March for May and June. And we realized quickly that we had already missed the boat.
Yeah.
It had taken off. It was gone. And then it wasn't until a year later that we realized that, you know what, you really need to start looking for internships in now, August, September, October for the upcoming year. And I think it's not just internships, it's also graduation and first time jobs. I know we're fortunate that same son has a commitment for a job next summer, as do many of his peers, but some do not. And the reality of it is that whether you're looking for an internship or a job, the time is now to start laying the groundwork. I mean, this world has changed. Students are stepping into something that is very different than when we were younger,
Yeah.
dealt with in school, looking for those jobs and internships for sure.
Oh my gosh, a whole different ball game, right? I never would have thought that a year in advance is when we needed to be looking for it. Um, so there's some things about the job market that we should know about how it's different. First, I heard yesterday that 24 months is what it is taking for folks to find a
24
job.
weeks.
I mean, sorry, weeks. Gosh, 24 weeks. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm already reducing anxiety. It's already dropped from 2 years to only half a year in the amount of time we had this conversation. 24 weeks, but that is still almost half a year, right?
Yeah.
It is, like Nick said, it's hard for students to stand out. What we have found is that when we were applying for jobs, maybe 30 people would have applied. But now, thanks to automation, it's not 300 people that are applying for the job. It's 3,000 people that are applying for a job. So that is a whole different ballgame when you think of it that way. And the other piece is AI is consuming a lot of entry level jobs. And so we need to get over, we're not applying for those jobs anymore. So there are fewer number of jobs for folks to be able to apply for. And then frankly, the career search guidance is relatively archaic. If you are talking to someone who says they can help and their career search guidance sounds like the same guidance you had when you were in high school, then they're not getting it right. And that's part of the problem as well.
Yeah. And there's also this thing called job hugging, which is very different than job hunting
Yeah,
and
we were
job
talking about that
hopping.
the other day. There is job hunting, there's job hopping, and now there is job hugging. So people are just holding on for dear life to the jobs that they have, which again is not leaving entry-level positions as open as they have been historically.
Yeah. So combine the job hugging, the AI, that's even hard for me to say, job hugging, the AI impact. I mean, like Marnie said, just fewer people leaving roles, fewer openings for students, and it's a real challenge. So why are we talking about this, Marnie?
Yeah. So, as Nick said, we wrote The Business of You. And frankly, I wish that we had had the opportunity to write this 6 years ago. It would have saved me 2 years of college um, for my son, figuring out what really we should be doing and what the right path for him was. Because there are conversations that we have had since then that have put him on the right path. And what we have found is that so the business of you is a story about a student who follows the typical path and does what is expected. So she's gone to school, she's gotten good grades, she's applied to clubs, she's done the things, and now she's looking for a job and she's not having any success. And in the book, we've given her a mentor that helps her figure out how to tell her story, how to ask the right questions, and how to lead her life. And it's a path that we know works because we have had this conversation not just at our own kitchen tables. I've had many, many more at my kitchen table because I've been tutoring for years and done coaching. But we've talked to hundreds, probably actually thousands of folks for whom this process has really worked, helped them figure out who they are and what they need to be. And one thing that we like to say, and we want to be really clear on this, is we consider ourselves geeks, not gurus in this field, right? We like to talk about it. We have lots of ideas on it, but we don't claim to have your answer. We do, however, believe that we have the right questions that you can ask so that you can help your child get their answer. And that's really what we care about.
Yeah.
So shout out to the folks on LinkedIn. I've got it up on my other screen. So want to say, hey, all, thanks for
Yeah.
joining. I'm going to
Good
try to
afternoon, everybody.
multitask, but yeah, we're going to
So,
walk through 3 segments, right? And give them some kitchen table talk. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, I just reiterate, why are we specifically? I think Marnie did a great job talking about, but our mission is simple. It's really to help students get noticed and get opportunities through with internships, jobs, and connections.
Yeah.
Based on the title, by going beyond the resume. And I think that's really important because that's where a lot of people are stopping and they're running into roadblocks. So today we're going to focus on what really matters, what we believe, 3 of the most important things that really matter, which is the whole idea of stories, skills, and networks. That is truly how students stand out in an overcrowded and, quite frankly, a competitive market.
Yeah.
So, and our goal today is to make this as simple as possible, to raise some points that you as parents, because both Marnie and I have been there, can take immediate action on. Because we know that you are, if you're listening to this, you're very actively engaged in your son, your daughter's future and chances of success. And these are absolutely some tips, like Marnie said, that we have found that has worked not only with our own children, but countless other young adults as well.
Yeah. So, and we're being asked on LinkedIn if this works abroad. It absolutely works everywhere because it is how you get noticed. So
Yep.
yes, Steve, you're in good shape. And Nick mentioned we wanted to start with storytelling. Again, we're going to give you some information. We're going to tell you stories, and then we're going to give you a question that you can use at your kitchen table or over cell phone, maybe even text message if your child is one of those. I have one of each. I have a texter and a caller. so so first, yeah, you want to share the first stat, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is a really telling stat, and for those watching, you can see it on the screen, which is research really shows that storytelling is 22 times more memorable and effective than simply listing experiences or credentials. I think it's important to note that I was on the hiring end where I was responsible for hiring many people straight out of college, even high school. And it's important to realize that we just don't want to know what your student has done. We want to know who they are and how they'll show up on the job. And it's the stories that communicate those types of behaviors like character and resilience, values. And those things are so much more impactful than just resume line items and GPA lines. So we're going to talk quite a bit about the whole notion of storytelling and what that means.
Well, and to Nick's point, he said quite a bit more impactful. Here's another stat from Carnegie, which is 85% of success is based on character skills or soft skills, not on not on technical skills. So you figure the resume is what's getting you in the door, right? That's listing the technical skills, the experience that you have, but it is not what's going to win the day over, especially for those of us that created resumes 30 years ago and maybe even 10 years ago. The career advice you had on resume writing then is not the way it works now. So 30 years ago, you were just aiming to have a lovely format and you were good to go, right? 10 years ago, you were aiming to put a picture on there, maybe add some highlights, some color to make things stand out. Now, everything's going through an applicant tracking system, which is ATS, and they all look very much the same. So think about if everything looks very much the same and so many students have all the credentials, all the degrees, etc., how are you going to stand out? As we said, it's with a story, but it's going to have to be on a cover letter with a connection through, networking somehow. And as maybe a little scary note for some folks, your student is already telling their story potentially on social media. So what you want to make sure is that the story that's being told out there is the story you want them to tell. So the resume connections are going to maybe get you to the interview, but when you get into the interview, this is when your story needs to shine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to add another thing. That resume, like Marnie said, we're downplaying a little bit the importance. I mean, it's still important, clearly, because that does get you into the interview, and the whole notion of storytelling should be applied to your resume as well. Your resume should tell a story about
Absolutely.
you, and there are so many advantages of technology today. One of which is you can simply upload your resume and you can say, okay, tell me, Mr. Chat GPT or whatever your technology of choice is, what story does this resume tell
Yeah.
when you evaluate it? But like Marnie said, that's only really part of the story. The other big part is the story that you're telling when you get in the door, and also when they're evaluating whether to get in the door. And like Marnie said, social media is so important. All of the social media handles, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, they all tell a story. And believe you me, that employers are looking. You've heard about it. It's true. I've seen it in action.
Yeah.
Employees are looking as kind of that last level cut in terms of whether or not to bring somebody on board or not. They're looking at the social media profiles of your children.
And I suspect many folks already have angst about that. so that is, just one of the many things. But let's talk about what happens when you get to the interview. I want to tell a story about one student in particular. He was sent to me from another student we had worked with. They called me and said, Marnie, will you please talk to Calvin? He's really quiet and he doesn't know what to do. And he hasn't gotten an internship. And he's got 2 interviews in another 10 days. So I hopped on a call with Calvin and said, hey, Calvin, so I hear you're first quiet and introverted, so I'll try not to overwhelm you because that can happen. But what feedback have you gotten in an interview? And tell me about what happens when you hit an interview. And first he said, I've been given feedback that I'm a bit all over the place in an interview. And I think those of us that have interviewed more than twice can feel that pain. And then he said, the problem is right from the beginning, they say, so tell me about yourself. And I panic. And so the only thing that comes to mind is the resume that he just submitted. And so starts chronologically plugging his way through. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, right? That's the facts. And we just said 22 times as powerful as fact is storytelling. So I spent an hour with him that first day, asking him to tell me what he was like, who he was, and what stories he could tell me. So he started thinking about some examples from soccer or what he was like in class. And we came up with a few things. He said, because I'm quiet, I am often sitting back and listening and questioning things. And so I often see what needs to be see what needs to happen, but I'm also the type that will get the job done. And he was able to tell me multiple stories about this. So I was starting to get a story of Calvin in my mind. And I said, Calvin, I know you're probably going to want to jot some notes down. Are you a digital kind of human or a paper pencil guy? He's like, I am a paper pencil guy in a digital kind of world. And I said, well, I think that might be your superpower. And he said, what? And I said, you've told me you're an introvert. Now I work with an introvert. Nick Freely, mentions he's an introvert. And so I know the power of introverts. They listen well. They ask great questions. But Calvin had this extra layer of he knows what needs to be done and he would do the work. So when he started framing all of his experiences and stories around this superpower, he had a hook to tell a story instead of just, well, I worked as a soccer referee. I work at an aquatics program, right? And when he now lights up when he is asked that question, because when they say, tell me about yourself, Calvin, he's going to say, well, I'm a paper pencil guy in a digital world, and I'm an introvert, and I use that as my superpower. And then he can use his experiences from there. So one of the things, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about that, and I think about this generation that is in college right now, even in high school, and just recently entered the job market. They have been so ingrained with the fact of when they communicate to recite facts,
Yeah.
and this whole notion of storytelling is something that we are expecting as employers, bringing them on because that's what we want to know about the individual and what they will bring to the table. That it's we're seeing that it's really becoming hard for these candidates out there right now to tell the story. So that example I think is perfect, and it extends far beyond just the whole notion of interviewing. it
Oh,
it it it, it really applies to another topic we'll talk about later, which is expanding your network, which will help you uh, expand your reach and your opportunities. So I think this whole notion of storytelling, we need to start thinking about, okay, well, how do we start pulling this out of people? And as a child, if my child, is now 16 years old, if I rewind the clock a little bit, what am I doing with them
yeah.
to start to have them think the entire storytelling mindset?
So it's
Um,
interesting because what often guidance counselors will have them start to collect their experiences in terms of clubs and things, but they don't take it from the storytelling angle. So any parents who have kids in college now that are listening are probably definitely thinking, yeah, those college essays were a struggle, right? But instead of starting from the experiences, start from getting them to think about, Nick and I often use the expression, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so if you were to define your child not as a soccer player, but maybe think about what made them a good soccer player, right?
yeah.
Did they have was it hard work and determination? Was it their effort? Was it their speed? Was it their strategy, right? You want them to start thinking about what, what are their character traits that really stand out in how they do anything. And the question you can ask them to get to this is what we call our kitchen table chat. The kitchen table conversation you should have with your kid is, what's something you've done recently that you're most proud of?
Yep.
And what I like about that is it might not be the first level answer. So This is a very awards driven society, right? So they might state an award or a game that they won or something. But if you ask them why they are proud of that and what they did to make it happen, you might really dig into something that's important to them. Nick, does anything come to mind for that? Do you have an example?
Well, I mean, just before we get into the example, it's digging into it and then asking them how that same trait might show up in what you do
Pertains
next.
someplace else. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I think, I was really proud of the fact that when we were down, let's playing a sport, since you've been talking about soccer, right, that we didn't give up or something to that effect. And we came back and scored. And the whole notion of resilience in the themes and whatever the specific example might be. But the more and more you talk about this with your student and cause them to reflect on it, the more and more types of things that student might start to think about, okay, this is how I've applied it before in the past, this is how I applied it today, and this is how I might apply it in the future. And along those lines, we talk about the notion of building up story banks. Because if you're anything like me, you're on the spot, you're in an interview, or you're out networking, thinking on the spot sometimes causes you to freeze. But the more and more you practice by having these conversations at home, within friends, at dinner, at the dinner table, hopefully the kitchen table, the more and more I think our children get used to talking about these types of things, and it starts to become automatic. Yeah, I could apply that whole notion with Calvin about thinking through things and processing things and insightful thoughts to almost everything that I actually do.
Well, and it's interesting. It's just like if you think about buying a red car, you then see red cars everywhere. As soon as you start realizing the character traits, then they will see how it plays out in lots of other things, and it will actually grow that character trait. So one of the questions on LinkedIn is, do you suggest talking to kids about their interpersonal and communication skills and blend them into their stories and soft skills? To which I say, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if they understand how they communicate, then that also shows how they're going to fit in with a team. Like Nick mentioned, that's one of the skills that can really bring value to folks, which is actually the next thing that that we're going to get
Yeah,
to.
that was that little sound effect that we heard. That was our cue to actually move on to the next subject before we run out of time. So you ready to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the second topic is skills and all about creating value and impact. And I think it's important to understand, because it's harder, right? That credentials and those resume line items, they help us get the foot in the door, but they don't guarantee impact, and they typically don't end up driving long-term success. And I think the hard truth is that students and parents so often overvalue the lines on the resume and undervalue the traits that make someone stand out, once they're actually on the job. I think we saw an article just the other day. It
Yeah.
was
One
HR
of the
Brew or
brews,
something.
morning
Yeah,
brew, HR brew. Yeah.
where they talked about the whole notion that certifications aren't what they used to be,
Mm-mm.
and I can reinforce this just with a conversation at a dinner at a restaurant just the other night, where somebody who spends their entire day looking at resumes, they said, I don't even look at certifications anymore.
Yeah.
Why? Because
You
there
can't
are
tell
so
the
many
value
different
of
types
them.
of
Yeah.
certifications on
Yeah.
so many different sources without any kind of, without very, there's not many source standards related to what
Yeah.
those
There's some
certifications
strong
actually mean.
industry standard ones in the medical field where they actually saw like a $5,000 boost in salary, but
Yep.
all of the like online ones, many of them, because there's no standard behind it, they're just ignoring them.
Yep. And in our book, The Business of You, we talk about two different types of ladders as it relates to the whole notion of learning and development. We talk about this credentials ladder versus the values ladder. And what we mean by that is and this is the default on what most of our children are going after, right? Which
Yeah.
is building that credentials ladder, which is the GPA, the test scores, the online certificates, the courses that they took. But if you compare that to what we call as the values ladder, which is those skills that really create value for other people, other organizations, and impact for those same people, things like problem solving and leadership and communication, we can go on and on there around
Long time.
creativity and resilience. um, that's the shortcut. That is the way to really stand out and differentiate yourself. um, I think we often say that students who kind of just focus on that one credentials ladder risk being forgettable, and those that climb the other ladder, the values ladder, those are the ones that could really deliver impact. Marnie, I think you have a story about this.
Yeah, so my daughter was a marketing major and was sitting on the beach in Hawaii working remotely. So for a lot of people, they would say living her best life for sure, right? A lot of people would envy that. But she said, I'm not feeling like I'm making an impact. I'm not being fully utilized. She liked to be productive. She wasn't that busy. And so I had a friend who was a principal and needed a fourth grade teacher. And I asked my daughter if she thought she wanted to be a fourth grade teacher. And she said, yeah, I do. It's in my blood. So she went, that was last year. She went and started teaching without credentials. So she's working on getting her degree now. But as part of their program, all of the teachers had to bring a passion project to the staff. And Josie was very good at Canva, which makes for fun, engaging, interactive, very pretty lesson plans and saves a bunch of time for teachers. So she did a workshop for the teachers, all of the tenured teachers who are certified on this particular skill. And folks who had been there 25 years said this was the best professional development I've ever had. They're all using these things. And this year, her second year, she's still working on getting certified. She's the team lead of tenured teachers because she's figured out how to provide value for everyone else there. So Steve asked the question on LinkedIn, how do you break the ice for kids when you want to have these conversations? It's definitely not with a nagging start on how your grades are, right? It is about what types of things are you enjoying? Where do you get lost in schoolwork or out in schoolwork? Because you're going to find some things where they can really drive value that maybe they hadn't thought about how it can connect in their jobs.
Yeah, we had, I think a lot of kids these days are really good at social media, right? And us as parents, we're looking at that and we're like, well, that's just a waste of time. Stop flipping through the screens. But I think if you dig deeper, and I've seen this with a number of people, that hang out with my son, they have developed skills of influence through their social media
Yeah.
postings, and they
Yeah.
have learned how to communicate with different demographics. And those are the types of skills that we're talking about. We're talking about the value skills. And the thing about those skills is that they compound over time. If you think of like a financial model, right? They're not one and done, which a lot of the resume line items are. Hey, I just took this certification. I'm now certified in Excel
Yeah.
for Business or something to that effect.
Right.
These skills of value, they compound over time. And guess what? This is what employers are actually evaluating during the interview process, right? They have dedicated interviews just for the behavior side of things. They have case interviews, case studies. They're looking at group projects. So building stories, tying it back to the first thing we
Yeah.
talked about
Yeah.
around these skills is really, really important.
So that reminds me, in high school, my son gamed way too much, and in college, way too much. And it made me crazy. So I spent all my time focusing on the fact that I wanted him to stop doing that. When I turned the question around into why he liked it, we unlocked some of the superpowers into what would make for a good job for him. And it was interesting because it was things like collaboration, cooperation, communication. And I did not see that coming because I was so annoyed that he wasn't how about sit down and do some calc too?
Yeah.
That I couldn't see a way to connect the dots. So really taking a look at what they are doing and can get lost in. And you mentioned the whole notion of story banks. And that is one thing that I've done with so many of the folks that we've worked with, where they start to think of their strengths and then create these stories that tell how they provide value, so that when they walk into an interview, regardless what question is being asked, they find a way to bring up one of their stories that really highlights a strength for that. That is definitely a way to stand out, that students are not, there's so many times using Chat GPT to read a prompt, answer a prompt, read a prompt, answer a prompt, instead of saying, I don't care what prompt you give me, I'm going to find a way to highlight this strength because I've got a story in the bank.
Yep. So let's bring it back to both the question that you asked about breaking the ice and then our kitchen table framework that
Yeah.
we've been talking about. And I'm going to build on what we said earlier, right? Where we said, okay, one way to get stories out of young adults is to ask them about a time that they were really proud of how they showed up, either at school or at work or what have you. But then I think we keep asking questions, asking the right questions. What skill did you use in that situation to help them start to identify these skills of impact? And then we keep asking questions. Okay, what's the value that those skills ultimately provided, either at school, at work, whatever environment they were using, to get your students, your young adults thinking about storytelling, skills, value skills, and then describing what the value is. Because once you can start to do that in one particular scenario, it just becomes easier and easier. And they'll find that it's typically the same skills because we are who we are. That's our core values, right? Those are the ones that make us the most proud. And then you can start to figure out all the different areas in which that's adding
The way it
value for
plays
sure.
out. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. All right. I wish I had a transition noise. Let me go.
Got one. Nice.
All right. Now I wish I could stop it. You ready to talk about networking, Marnie?
Always ready to talk about networking, because that is the key to it all. If you walk away with nothing else, check out this stat. If Nick can figure out how to pull it up on the screen, 85% of jobs are found now, are acquired through networking. That was a Forbes 2025 research. So that is current. 85% of jobs. So
Yeah.
if they are not doing this, there's trouble ahead. And it's not even, it's all about connections. It always is. I could go on for days. Where should we start?
Well, I think I would start with what we hear most often
Oh, I mean, most of the
from
time kids say, I don't like to do this. I don't know how to do this. I
I
don't
have
want to go to a
no
networking event.
idea
Yeah.
where to begin,
Yeah.
and is it really that important? That's I hear that stat, but I'm one of the 15%, and I think we need to reinforce this over and over again, because really it's hard, especially in today's tough job market, to succeed alone. The students who get noticed, who the ones that are landing those internships and jobs and unlocking those opportunities, almost always have people that help them, guide them, advocate for them, and literally open the doors to those
Yeah.
opportunities.
They often think that networking is just going to collect a bunch of names,
Yep.
and it is not. It is to build relationships. Um, yeah.
So that's funny you say that, because I remember when Connor first signed up on LinkedIn, he was like, Dad, I got 500 connections, right? That's all I needed. I've hit the magic mark.
Perfect.
And I asked him, okay, well, who knows you? Who's going to vouch for you of those 500 connections? And I think he had a real hard time identifying that, because they're playing the game, which is one of the things that you need to do. I get it, right?
100%. Yeah.
Let's build out the field of available connections, but they're not taking it to whatever that next level is how can you make those connections work for you?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that we really like to talk about, so we talk about a personal board of advisors, which is folks who can support you in a lot of different ways. In the book, we talk about students needing to have mentors, people who have been there, done that. connectors, right? That's where the networking comes to play. And then challengers, which I think is the most important. Somebody will give them honest answers, honest advice, and not just be the cheerleader. And parents, that isn't always you, because they'll see the challenge as nagging. And so you're really looking for the folks, those friends that can be really honest with them, right? You were encouraging them to have them. But one of the reasons that you especially want to think about helping students develop a personal board of advisors is that they are going to need letters of recommendation.
Yep.
And
It's a great starting point.
yeah, well, you want to tell them what kids typically tell us they do when we ask them about letters of recommendation?
Yeah, I'm just going to go up to my teacher when I need it, and he likes me, I think. And he teaches a subject that I'm interested in pursuing a job or something to that effect, right? That's subject in my major.
Almost verbatim what we get all of the time. And what is my answer to that? That's a terrible idea.
Terrible. And you're too late. Most, I mean, if you're saying I'm going to do it at the end of the semester or what have you, but I think we need to think about a whole bunch of things in terms of looking at letters of recommendations. And again, I think these same principles apply to building out your network everywhere. But you want to tell the Connor story before we get into that?
I absolutely will. So right after Nick's son gave me that, I'm just going to ask my soccer coach. I said, no, that's not a good idea. I said, let's think about the job you want to apply for. So we're going to be proactive, and we're going to aim for the end result that we want. We're not just going to take a pot shot of, do I have 6 people who like me? Thinking about the job that you want in data science as a business analyst, who would be the best, the dream recommendation for you? I was surprised when he said this, because I thought it was going to be somebody he knew. And he said, I don't even remember his name, the CEO of NVIDIA. I said, great.
Hi.
He would make an amazing letter of recommendation. Do you know him? No. Do you know someone who knows him? No. Are you at least connected with him on LinkedIn? I said, there's no reason we can't try for that, but you better start with commenting, and sharing, because he does not know you. And until he does, he's certainly not going to recommend you. So we'll keep that as a stretch target, and you keep working your way to try to find him. But let's find a target, maybe somebody you know now, that would be really good at potentially influencing that position.
Best case scenario.
Best case scenario. If you can find someone that'll influence that position. If you can't find someone that'll influence the decision, you want someone that can highlight all of your strengths as closely aligned to the job description as you can. So Connor was taking 2 classes that fall, both of which were closely aligned to the position that he was looking for. And he hadn't started yet. And he said, well, one of those professors should do it. And I said, absolutely. What would you like that professor to say about you? He said, well, I'd like him to say that I was, interested in the topic, that I was good at it, that I was, and he had a list of things he would want him to say about him. And I said, now, how are they going to know that?
Yep.
What do you mean?
Yep.
I said, well, if you just sit in class and do your work, are they going to know how hard you're working? They're not. So
let's talk about the kitchen table exercise in this case, because everybody out there, if your son, daughter, they're looking for any type of job, any type of internship, they need letters of recommendation. I'll even go back to high school, where if you're looking to get into college, you need or a job straight from high school, you're going to need letters of recommendation in almost every circumstance.
Yeah.
So here are some questions that you could ask as parents at the kitchen table, over the phone, if they're off going to school right now. First is, if you had to choose 3 people to write you a recommendation, who would they be? Second question is, like Marnie said, what do you hope they say about you? Okay. And then the third question is, have you actually connected with them, introduced yourself and followed their work, whatever it is, connected with them? And you'll be amazed at how many people don't take advantage of ways in which they can get to know these people that they identified to write these letters of recommendation.
Number one cheat code:
Go to office hours.
office hours, hands down.
100%.
Now, they are also in a land of networking going to tell you that they don't want to go to office hours because they don't know what to say. So, one way you can support your kids is to give them some things to talk about when they go to office hours. I wish I'd figured this out before my junior year in college. It would have made my life much easier. But I went with, I'm not good at this topic. I don't love this topic and I need your help. And boy, did they unlock the topic for me. If it is in a subject that they like, they could go say, I'm really interested in this topic. I'd love to hear about careers for people that use this content day to day. Or, what are some of your favorite stories in doing this type of work? What are the best jobs you've seen students get who are good at this? College professors really want to help, and those office hours literally are often empty. So
Yeah.
it's going to take some work to get your student to agree to do this, but they will be much more likely to do this if they're going with the intent of, in the long term, I want to get this person to write me a letter of recommendation. So I want to have conversations around what's important to me and how it connects with them so that they'll be willing to write about that.
Yeah. And we can't stress enough the importance of planning in advance of this. When you're planning, when you ask the question, what do you hope that they say about you, right? You have to take action and actually represent those behaviors that you're hoping they say about you. So, going at the end up to somebody who you have a very just a formal, typical professor student relationship is typically not going to either A, get you the letter of recommendation, or B, it may get you that letter of recommendation, but the content of it is not going to be the story that you wanted to portray with whoever the prospective employer is going to be. Okay, I think we're almost out of time here,
We
Marnie.
are.
Did we have any other questions that we needed to address?
We have gotten the ones on LinkedIn. I did just add to LinkedIn the link to, so if you want to continue the conversation, feel free to add things in the chat. We'll get notified and we will certainly respond. I just added, as soon as I hit send, I'll add the link to, we have a Facebook community for the business of you where we're going to continue these conversations. So there's a link on the screen. There's a link in the LinkedIn comments. If you want to join that, this is for parents, students, educators that really want to help their students become their best version and figure all of these pieces out. So we'd love to connect with folks there. And
also, we've talked about a lot of the concepts, not all certainly, but a lot of the concepts that we talked about today are also in our book, The Business of You. So we put that link on the screen as well, and we'll do it again. We'd love for you to check that out. Both Marnie and I are on LinkedIn. We'll put our names are in the invite. You'll see it. We're easy to find. We'd love for you to reach out if you have any further questions, comments, or if you're watching this after the fact and want to reach out to us with anything. We'd love to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. And then we would also say, if you think that some of these conversation points will be useful for another parent out there today, we'd love for you to share this conversation in your platform of choice.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you so much for joining. Hope we have some conversation starters for your kitchen table.